I know you as a badass, as you are, someone who is definitely devoted to making sure equity is in our world today. So I appreciate you. The vehicles in which you use, obviously, you have a huge platform when it comes to politics and voting. And I want to thank you for all that you do. But by way of background, um, let me start with this. Tell everyone about Stephanie and Young and what you do.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me
Yeah.
here. I love you and I admire you so much and all the work that you've done to ensure that you're bringing such a diverse set of voices to the table to talk about the issues that impact our community the most. So kudos and thank you to you. Yeah, so, I'm originally from Atlanta, but I've lived all over. I was introduced to, I would say, politics and civic engagement and all of that kind of community work through my parents. My father was a senior bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and I got the privilege to live in South Africa during the transition from apartheid to
Mm,
democracy in the 90s. And so I got to witness firsthand what it looks like to build a democracy and make sure that there's free and fair elections. And that imparted so much on me and the way in which I look at the world and look at my own gifts and talents and how am I using that to really push
mhm.
us forward. My background is in political communications, but I did spend some time outside of that world and worked in the private sector, worked at BET and
Yep.
also NBC
Yep.
Universal Cable Entertainment for a little bit before being sucked back into this
They
world.
can't let you go. It's like my world. Once we get in, they don't let you go. They don't let you leave. Um,
Yeah,
I gotta
it's like
I
I
have to tell
definitely
everyone this
stay away.
anecdote because on my social media, Culture for Democracy, when we all vote, I got so much response and feedback, and people were saying, "How'd you guys get all these celebrities there?" By way of background, when we all vote, I am talking to Stephanie because Stephanie runs that. She walked up to me one day in an event and asked me to be a part of it, and I was so very humbled and so grateful that you saw, because it's really hard to transition as a woman who has a voice and primarily known in sports. Anyone who knows me knows I'm
Mhm.
activated when it comes to culture and voting and making sure that more specifically my platform is about brown women winning. And so thank you for that opportunity. Can you tell everyone
Of
what
course.
your role is at When We All Vote and more specifically what that is?
Yeah. So when we all vote is a nonpartisan initiative launched by Michelle Obama, our former First Lady, in 2018. And our whole mission is to change the culture around voting and to increase participation in every election by closing the race and the age voting gap. And I am the executive director. I started out when she decided to launch it in 2018, and I've been there ever since, really building our relationship and our brand. And my whole goal has been how are we making ourselves culturally relevant? How are we using voices like yours to reach people where
Mm,
they are. We work a lot with athletes, influencers, and artists. Mrs. Obama has a number of co-chairs that join her. So folks from Jennifer Lopez to Selena Gomez to Chris
mhm,
Paul
mhm,
and Steph Curry sit on her board as co-chairs. So we really are trying to do this differently, and we're not trying to do this type of work uh, only in like high political seasons, but consistently where we're engaging in community and we're talking about how everything that we're seeing around us, how that is all impacted by voting. Because people often like to say, well, I don't want to talk about voting. Let's talk about policy change. Let's talk about this. Well, nothing happens
mm,
if we don't vote, and that is literally the gateway into seeing any type of change. So I decided that I really wanted to bring together a cross section of industries to talk about what is all of our collective responsibility in protecting and expanding democracy. We've seen over 500 voter suppression bills all over this country introduced to stop Black and Brown people and young people and those with disabilities from voting. And that's purposeful because we're so powerful when we actually all vote together. And so I wanted folks in all industries to see that they play a role in this. So that's how the Culture of Democracy Summit came to light. We brought people from tech,
mhm.
entertainment, sports, music to talk about everything that we all can do together consistently. And there's never been a national conversation at that level. So I was so grateful that you participated and that we had so many amazing voices participate that day, because what we did was show that
All of
democracy is
us.
owned by all of us. It's
Yeah.
a team sport, it's a consistent sport, and we can never get off the field. We have to be focused, and we have to do all that we can through the avenues that we
So
have
as
to
you're
make it
saying
better.
this and I'm listening, she's like, "Thank you for coming." You guys, I was happy to be there. It was a not even necessarily just only in addition to stars, but there were people who you knew or activated and you wanted to meet them and tell them thank you for the work that you do. You put together a great group of people that I know outside of that event, and I'm like, this is amazing. So, and who's not showing up for
Thank you.
Michelle? Like really, like Michelle could be like, you know what, Carrie, I just need a kidney. I'd be like, you know what, girl, I'm gonna give
I
you
just
this
need a
right one
kidney.
because I don't think I drank that much. So the reality is, culture for democracy is our culture, everything that matters to us, and how
Right.
all we across all the culture,
Mhm.
it's a collective. Whether, like you said, sports, politics, entertainment, science, tech, we all have something to say, and we all need to be together, working together. How
Yep.
how difficult is it, especially for our folks? How difficult is it for them to really truly understand the power of their vote, especially as we have midterms coming up? So, one, tell me what midterms
Yeah.
is, and two, why is it so difficult to
Mhm.
get us out? And people think you only vote for the president every 4 years.
Yeah. Well, the midterm elections are incredibly important because we have all 435 members of Congress up for election. So every crazy member of Congress that you've heard say something weird, they
So, like,
actually
if
are
I
up for
wanted to get
reelection.
Marjorie Green
And
out, right, or Matt Gates, I'm just asking anybody. This is my not your opinion, but I'm saying if I was going somewhere and I had some names that I was upset with, the midterms is where it happens. If somebody's listening,
the midterms is where it happens. Yeah, you can be fired from your job if you are a member of Congress every 2 years. So there's no reason why someone should hold office forever, literally, because you have an opportunity to vote them out. And historically, midterm elections are low turnout. In 2018, we saw an increase in turnout, especially amongst young people. We hope to see that continue this year, but and that's why we're putting all of our effort into ensuring that people are registered, but they're making their plans to vote. But it's not just members of Congress. We have over 30 senators that are up for re-election in states like Georgia, where I'm from, and other places. In addition to that, we have people like secretaries of state. These are the people who determine what elections look like in your state. So whether or not you're going to have a partisan election, someone who has an idea of who they want to win, and they're going to do everything that they can to screw with democracy to ensure that they have their final say, or we are able to elect people who do believe in democracy. And I think that we sometimes look at these races or these elections as like an immediate fix. This is not. This is more like making an investment in our long term health as a country. So if we don't vote in this midterm election, we're giving people who might not believe in democracy an opportunity to sit at the table and say, "I determine what this state election is going to look like from here on out." Meaning in 2024, when maybe a candidate they don't like who wins the presidency, they'll say, "I don't have to certify this election." I think everybody remembers what happened on
mhm.
January 6th, and I think that we all, because we're so desensitized, just looked away. But that was a big deal. It still is a big deal, and there are people who still believe in the big lie that the 2020 election was illegitimate, and a lot of those people are running for office. So it's very, very important that we're paying attention. And also, there's those governors who are up for election, mayors, and these are people who are going to make those immediate decisions in your life. So, what I again like to say is voting is that long term investment that we have to make, and we cannot sit out. And because when we do sit out, there are other people who are ready to make decisions for us. And look and see where we are with the Supreme Court. We have such a partisan Supreme Court. We've never seen
And by
this
partisan, you're
at this level
saying
before.
we could have changed the makeup of the court. It's conservative. And so that's why
Yeah,
Roe versus Wade was reversed. And that's because if we even take it
yeah.
back to the beginning of this, that's why we vote. People don't understand the philosophy. If we pay attention to what's happening and we put certain people in power, this is what can happen when we ignore when we ignore it.
When we
Yeah.
ignore it, and
To
they're
ignore
counting
it.
on
Yeah.
us to ignore it. So when people are like, "I'm not falling for that," I'm like, "Actually, you are
So
falling for it. That what you're saying right now
th-
is what they want you
why
to say. Like this,
why
none of
don't
this
we
matters."
understand the important okay, midterms are coming up. Why don't we understand, myself
Right.
included, the importance of it? Why is the messaging being muted? Is that purposeful, or is that we're not doing a good job in getting it out?
Well, look, the federal government needs a marketing team. That's number one.
I wish they'd get on board
Like,
with that,
we're
right?
right. I mean, I worked in political
Yeah.
communications and also in the office of public engagement in the Obama White House. So that was basically marketing, but it's not. And then we work with like an ad campaign, like an ad company on like some pro bono stuff. But no, seriously, like there's no reason why organizations like ours exist. Think about it. Like it's the government's job to help us get registered. Like I don't even know why we actually have to register in countries like Australia. Like if you aren't registered to vote, you have to pay a fine. And other places,
Why
there's
don't we
automatic
do
voter registration.
that?
It's like
Why don't we
silly.
do that?
Well, because voting has never been for
Why
us in this
though? But
country. If you
why?
think about it, like, voting initially started for white land
Mm.
owning men. That was who it was for. So if you were a poor white man or you didn't own any land, you couldn't even vote, right? And then eventually it expanded to all white men, and then eventually expanded to white women, and then eventually expanded to everybody else because voting
So
is
voting has
power.
always been
And
exclusive, not for us. And since its inception, and when they've
correct.
expanded it for all of us, there are those who still want to take it away and take it to its original state. Okay.
Absolutely. And then also you have a Supreme Court that after President Obama was reelected in 2012 and 2013, they gutted the Voting Rights Act. So basically what they said was that, there's really no racism anymore. Look, we have a black president, so we don't need protections in states like Alabama or Mississippi or Georgia or Florida because, there's no racism. So people should be able to make whatever voting laws they want. And then they went absolutely berserk and crazy with all the voter ID laws. And if you think about it too, all the formerly incarcerated Americans who lose their right, they still have to pay taxes, but they also can't vote. All of these things are purposeful. And I know that it feels heavy and it feels like, oh my gosh, this is so much kind of information to intake. And you might feel overwhelmed, but voting is absolutely the least that you can do. And I'll also ask you, like, do you remember learning about
No,
voting in high school? Like, what do you remember
nothing.
about learning when it
Nothing.
came to civic engagement
Nothing.
at all?
Nothing. Nothing.
Exactly. So, and school boards make those decisions. School boards are also people, elected officials in your city. In addition to that, if you think about back to the Reagan administration, there was a lot of severe cuts to public education that also happened right after really
Yeah.
integration. So once
Yeah.
Black people
Yeah.
or other people of color got access to education, it was like, well, let's not fund these schools in downtown Atlanta. Let's fund the schools
Yes.
in the
They,
suburbs. Where the property values are a
every
little higher. So,
time we
and we'll
make
give
some
those.
progress, right? We, especially the marginalized, the black, the brown, the women, there is always an opposing voice throughout history. If you look back, that says, no, not so much. Let's put a caveat here. Let's find a
Yeah,
way to handicap the right that they have won. Let's find a way to really undermine the good that is probably being done here so that the power stays with the people who originally had power. And that was rich white men. And that is the case today. Yeah.
rich white men. And that's who this country was built for, created for, right? I think, when people think about critical race theory, they don't
Mm,
know what it is, number one. But really, what it is looking critically at how race has impacted every aspect of our life and our institutions, right? So how our institutions have been created to protect
yeah.
basically white supremacy, and our institutions, like different institutions within
Yes.
our government, and voting is one of those institutions. And I think that now we're in this period of great awakening where more of us are like, wait a minute, this
Right.
doesn't seem right. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel fair. This doesn't feel like a true democracy. So, we're in this time of transition. And that's why sticking with it, focusing, paying attention, supporting organizations like mine, making sure that
Right.
you're registered, you're ready to vote, and you're talking to the people in your lives is so critically important because in order for us to move past this place and space, we have to have this consciousness, right? So that we can change things and really get back, or not get back, but create a new track.
I'm going to talk to the typical voter. I can, and it's annoying. Most people, and this is embarrassing to say, but in my world, if you talk to a lot of these athletes, the first time they voted was when Barack was running for office, if they are of a certain
Mhm.
age. And the others now are really
Mhm.
apathetic about the process. I can't. There are so many people. Have been apathetic about the process, meaning, you just don't see the hope. So you get into, Stephanie, let's
Yeah,
do a worst case scenario. Someone is listening and they say, I actually want to go and vote. I'm going to vote in the midterm election. They've been advertising it. I've been paying attention. I want a new
yeah,
mayor. I want a new, whatever it may be, because it's always something up, right? For the ballot, right?
Right.
So they
Yeah.
get there and they don't know anything. They just know about the one person that they came to vote for. What do you suggest in that moment? Do you take a voting guide with you?
Yeah. So you can, or better yet, you can come to whenweallvote.org. We have a whole voting or election center, and we have a tool called Ballot Ready. And basically, you can look up your ballot and see what's on your ballot ahead of time. So you put your information in, and you can look and see, okay, these different, provisions are on my ballot. These different candidates are on my ballot, and you can read literally about each and every one of them. So it gives you more time to digest and understand. What we know through our research is that people are really intimidated by the process. So when they're like, I don't want to vote, sometimes it's coming from really just they are self-conscious about it, because we're talking about how this is such a big election, and this is going to be, there's so many consequences, and people feel sometimes I'm not qualified to be able to make decisions that big, right? But being able to look at your ballot ahead of time, and that gives you the confidence in walking in the booth and knowing that you're going to make some good choices and decisions
Yeah.
because you're prepared. So yeah, you can look up that tool with us at When We All Vote. But we partner with an organization called Ballot Ready to do that, and that hopefully will
Yeah.
give you the confidence that you need. And just look. Just sometimes you have to go with your gut too. I don't want to pretend like I walk into the voting booth and every time I'm like, yeah, I know this, I know that, I know this person. Sometimes I just vote for my party, the party that I want to vote for, and that's how I decide to do it that time. But you know it is made, I think, extra complicated for a reason, and I think that we're not prepared in school, but that's where we come in. We want to be that helpmate, and we want to make sure that you feel supported in the process and you do not feel intimidated, because trust me, somebody who
Mhm.
is not as smart as you is going in there and they're voting in ways and they're not
At
thinking about
all.
you at all.
So if you had to, and I'm gonna go a little personal here, you said, you lived with your father
Yeah.
in South Africa and you watched as they rebuilt a democracy, and that really planted a seed for what it can be or what it looks like or what it could look like. No system is perfect. But
Mhm.
if you look,
No.
you've worked with Obama, you work with the Obama administration, you've been in DC, you know that world. That world is so unfamiliar and intimidating to most, myself included. I hang out, we have mutual
Mhm.
friends. I go to DC, I'm like, this world is something. It is something. So
Yeah.
what do
Yeah.
you find personally? What do you think is the biggest threat? Obviously our threat to democracy, but what is the biggest threat? What do we really need to hold on? If there was one thing that you said, let me work on this because I think that will open up everything in terms of equity.
Yeah. Ooh, gosh, I think the problem is that there isn't just
Mm,
like one thing, right? When you look at a true democracy, it's like one vote like counts, right? Fully. But if you live in certain states, we still go by this electoral college situation, which is super old school. And for those people who don't know what the electoral college is, it's basically gives states a certain number of votes, so that no matter kind of how the state, let's just say the state all votes for one person, that goes to the majority of those votes in that state go to one candidate. So what that means is that if you voted for someone else, your vote kind of doesn't count, and
mm,
that's demoralizing.
mhm.
And the Electoral College was set up honestly just to keep slave states in the same kind of power level with northern states. So we're working on such an old racist system that said, okay, well, those of you in Virginia and South Carolina, we don't want you to feel left out. So we'll count Black people or enslaved people as three-fourths of people so that we can add them up and they become more numbers and you can have more electoral votes so that you can have more of a say. So our stuff is just like really slanted already, and we got to kind of go in and clean a lot of it out. So it's hard to say like one particular thing, but I would say right now in this moment, what scares me the most is misinformation that people are consuming every single day. And I think not just about like the fake news that's like passed around on social media and social platforms. I think about some like real quote unquote reputable cultural sources that like spew and like lift up the weirdest, the wrong, like many wrong people consistently, and the spewing of bad information. And I am so actually shocked at how misinformed our people are. So the one thing I would say is, like social media is not
Mhm.
a news source. Now, if you are following Vox, if you're following Associated Press, if you're following, other reputable news sources, the New York Times, Washington Post, papers and media outlets of record, that's news. But what somebody's posting on Facebook or what they're posting on Instagram or TikTok,
You're
that
so
is
right.
not real. And like we take that
I
stuff
will
at
tell
face
you,
value.
I would
And so
listen, Stephanie, you preaching to the choir. I will have legitimate conversations with people and they'll be like, no, I saw it the other day. It said they had said, and I'm like, who is they? And people that I consider
right.
intelligent, whomever they find that fits whatever they feel, which is why some outlets, and this is my talk, this is not Stephanie's opinion, but some out like a Facebook, I had to get off because I was like, I can't. And I know they go out of their way to try to change it now, but then for years we were listening to things that were just like, they said she had 5 heads and 2 kids. I remember this has nothing to do with anything, but I remember when Sarah Palin was running for office and she was chosen rather, right?
That was the beginning.
And social media, that's when it went in. I believe the misinformation went into a frenzy with the thought of this woman. She was so incredibly polarizing. But that's when that was my first witness of it all. You remember that time, obviously, because
Yeah,
that they're going.
yeah. I mean, it was all about
Yeah,
President Obama being a
they start it,
Muslim.
he wasn't born
I
here, and then there was something about her daughter having a baby by a black rapper, like she was secretly pregnant and had a baby by a black. It was just all I was like, enough, I can't. It just doesn't sound logical. And in my mind, I'm all like, people will believe
yeah,
what they want to believe. So you're right, misinformation is a huge problem because people don't want. Like there are people who will tell you January 6th was fine, nothing happened, that wasn't a threat to our country.
but we're completely desensitized. Like I saw an article the other day about, and I believe it was from CNN about how like we social media is changing the way that we think. Our attention span is limited, so we can't absorb as much information as we used to, and it's creating more isolation, more violence. All of these things. It's like literally like, and changing our empathy levels as well. So, like, because we're seeing fighting, we're seeing so many bad things on these platforms that make us feel like it's okay. So, when we see, I don't know, thousands of white people like storm the Capitol with Confederate flags, it's like, psh, another day. No, it's not another day. And that's why it's so incredibly important that the January 6th hearings actually come to some sort of conclusion. And that's why it's incredibly important what's happening with the former president actually being, potentially, he's
Yeah.
not indicted yet, but like all of these things are happening and they're important to actually protect our democracy because if there are no checks and balances, then what
Yeah.
are we doing this for? If people are not going to be held accountable
Huh.
for their bad
What are we
actions,
here
what are we
for?
doing this for?
What is the message we're sending? I want to repeat what you said because it's very powerful. You talked about the actual voting process and how it began. It began for rich white men. That's what it was for. They started to expand it because they had no other choice because they wanted equity, not because they thought it was good to make sure that the marginalized, the women, the blacks were included. It was because it helped their process. Um, and over the
Absolutely.
years we have refused to adjust rules that were based how many years ago? You know what I mean?
In the founding of this country, from 17, in the
You don't think the
1700s.
system has
I mean, we
changed a
still
bit? You know what I mean? They still have the same voting rule. That's insane to me.
Yeah, I mean, it is nuts. If you think about it though, let's just think about when the Voting Rights Act, that was what,
Yeah. Yeah.
1965, I believe?
64?
Not even
I don't
63,
know.
65.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's in
Yes.
our parents'
Yeah, for
lifetime.
sure. Oh, for
And I
sure.
think we speed past and we don't recognize that. Like my grandmother was born in 1913 in Lovejoy, Georgia, and she technically really did not get the right to vote in this country until
Same.
she was
My
50
grandma was
years
born in
old.
1912. She talks about it
So
all the time. Same.
yeah. So, like, we're not
Yeah.
that far removed, and I think that, like, we're just things are moving it feels like we're moving so fast, like, time is, like,
Mhm,
elastic, I don't
mhm.
know what's happening right now, but, like, things are moving so fast, we don't recognize that, like, we have not been on this journey so long. This is a very young, young country, and that's one of the reasons why people are so afraid of our votes is because they actually know that we have the power to change things. They know this country is going to look different.
Mhm.
We're talking about the next 20, 25 years. Like, this is going to be a majority minority country. So people of color will be the
Mhm.
majority.
Mhm.
They know
And
that.
that is why we're
That is
here.
why
Right.
they're acting.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And the whole, and also like, and I'm speaking literally on behalf of myself here, but if you you heard a congresswoman say to the former president of the United States, who was a part of spewing all the disinformation and continues to be
Mhm.
to this day, which is beyond dangerous, literally say and thank him for protecting white life
Literally!
when it came to
This
Roe.
woman
And I'm like,
She
white life?
said
And that was
she
not
did
a
not
Freudian
even
slip.
misspeak. Oh, maybe I did the next day. This woman was insane. I'm going to tell you what else is insane. The fact that we have a Supreme Court justice by the name of, this is all Cari Champion saying, the fact that we have a Supreme Court justice by the name of Clarence Thomas with his wife Jeannie, who is
Oh,
100% in bed with the right party, and the white part
right there
during
during
the
the
insurrection,
insurrection, through
telling
the line.
Trump to do all types of illegal things as the president. This woman is a radical. And do you not believe they don't pillow talk? And do you not believe that he's not making sure she doesn't go to jail? Because what she did is, it's one, he should not be sitting on that. He should not be sitting.
He should be defrocked, whatever, sit
Whatever.
down. Look, as my
Defrocked.
mother following
Yes.
Thurgood Marshall is like a disgrace. My mother says that consistently, but like it is a disgrace. Thurgood Marshall, that's a person who filled a seat. So I mean, it's beyond me. We've reached like a different level. So no matter how exhausted we all are from everything, like we don't have the ability to like take a long nap here. So right now, and I'm not sure the exact air date of this, but we're about 10 Mondays
This
away
airs
from
on
the election.
Monday, so that's fine. Yeah, so we're
Okay.
yeah.
We'll be
Yeah,
about
and we
9
can, and
days
by the
away.
way, as we get even closer, we'll re-up and put more messaging out. And so, and so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
say all that to complain so people understand the urgency of what we're doing. So you cannot stay out on social media and be like, I know what's going on with Kim Kardashian and North, and not know what's going on in our country. It is unfair to yourself. It's unfair to your children. It's unfair to your family. It is so disrespectful in the country that we are living in. If we needed to vote, if you thought voting was like breathing, it is the equivalent. Like, you need to breathe to live. I
Yes.
promise you, that's how I feel about what the lack of urgency when it comes to voting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people live, especially because of all the misinformation they're getting, or just lies, really, on social media. They feel as if, oh, everything's rigged or it's conspiracy. I worked in the federal government. I worked there. Okay,
It wasn't your cousin
for
at the
many years.
Pentagon? You remember when COVID first started? My cousin at the Pentagon said,
Yeah,
"You do not have a cousin at the
totally,
Pentagon."
totally.
Stephanie worked there.
At
She
the
worked
Pentagon.
in Washington D.C.
Right.
She's legitimate, not your cousin at the Pentagon. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, it's people like me. Like nobody is coming up with some deep conspiracies. Like nothing is. It's just there are people who are trying to be corrupt for sure, and that was definitely a former president of the United States, and we're seeing that play out right now. But at the end of the day, like this is not an episode of Scandal.
Mhm.
This is real life. This is not like Last Designated Survivor. We need to and that's one of the reasons why I had the whole entertainment panel at our summit to talk about we have to have new narratives and more nuanced stories that we're telling the public about government because it's not supposed to always be this kind of one like lane of like corruption, which I think helps to feed into any bad information you get. You're going to refer back to that bad TV show you watched, even though, yeah, we like to watch it, it's fun, whatever, but it's not real. And I think that sometimes we get wrapped up in these like fake conspiracies of like, well, it doesn't matter what I do because everything's already set up. No, it's not actually. But what's happening right now is that you're really falling into that matrix of feeling like things are set up, and people are like, "Well, great, you gonna stay home, and I'm gonna vote."
There are people with huge platforms who believe that, and that is another part of what you said is you think is the biggest problem is the misinformation. Everybody I know,
Yeah,
something can happen, and they're like, "I'll tell you, if you look back on this date, it indicated that," and you're just like, "Okay." For me, I try to stay grounded and not really feed into perhaps, but there is something, Stephanie, to the system is working the way the system is set up to work. So
that's
what
true.
I think,
Yeah,
again, people might be confusing conspiracy theories for the system is set to work the way the system is set to work.
right. Yeah, and one thing I do want to mention is gerrymandering because I think when you think about those members of Congress, right? You're like, okay, I'm from Atlanta. John Lewis was my congressman like my entire life, basically.
Mhm.
But we voted for him and we loved him, and he's obviously an icon and all of these different things. And I think about that district in Atlanta and the way that it's carved out. And what they do is on the state legislative side, right? So the people who you probably don't even think you're voting for because you're not paying attention for them, but when you don't vote, you actually are
Mhm,
voting for
mhm.
somebody because you're for someone else, right? They are able to determine like how they map out these districts, right, in your state. And so what that means is that they have taken the pen and gone super crazy to ensure that we don't ever want the seat not to be a red seat, right? Or we don't ever want the seat not to be a blue seat potentially. So let's make this whole like district the shape of an E. It doesn't
Okay.
even make sense. So that we're packing in the voters that we
Mhm.
know will vote for us. And so that this other group of people will never, ever have a chance to win. And that's what gerrymandering is. It's where politicians are picking their voters as opposed to it being the other way around. So it can feel like, well, sometimes it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter what we do. We don't have enough
Right,
numbers to beat
right.
this person, right? That is what former Attorney General Eric Holder is working on right now with his organization. And if you tap into what they're doing, I mean, they're helping to redraw maps all over this country and helping to really end partisan gerrymandering, so that really does count when you actually vote. So some of these kind of more institutional problems that are creating, the system to work in the way that
Mhm,
they were
mhm.
created to work in, right, are being addressed. We might not know that they're being worked on. So I want people to at least have some hope and understanding that like the things that we're talking about aren't just like flying by the wayside and nobody's paying them any attention. People are working on them. It just takes a long time, just like it took 50 years to
It
overturn
takes a long
Roe.
time.
Okay. Because it didn't just happen. It took them a long time to get to this moment and to this place. And so it's going to take us a very, very long time to right some of these wrongs. But we will never be able to do that if we do not vote. And that's why it's so critically important. I'll also say one thing when it comes to righting some of these wrongs in the way our system is set up is that we had the Freedom to Vote Act in the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We're trying to restore the John Lewis Voting Rights Act so that we can protect these states that have a history of discrimination on the basis of race, like Georgia and other states that are experiencing high voter suppression issues. And then we also have the Freedom to Vote Act, which
Mhm.
expands the right to vote. It helps with automatic voter registration in some states. It helps with more early voting days. It modernizes our system because we all grew up believing, and everybody says the United States is the best country in the world. Well,
Yeah.
are we?
Yeah.
There's many
Yeah.
other great countries. And if they're so great, why are our voting systems so old and antiquated? Why do we go to a polling place, we have
What
to
is
wait
yeah,
an
what is
hour or
that?
2
I
hours
should be able to vote
in
from
line?
my phone. It's
It
yeah.
Look, exactly. So why aren't we updating these processes and these systems? But it's not even just voting. Look around. We just got an infrastructure bill for the first time in I don't
Yeah.
know forever. Because our roads are crumbling. Obviously, climate change is literally taking over the world right now,
All over the
all
world.
over the world. There's floods in Pakistan
Everywhere
and
you
all
turn,
these
the
terrible
flooding,
things
yeah, there was a
everywhere
it was a
you turn.
massive flooding, I think, in Mississippi the other day or somewhere here I was just like, it was just yeah,
In Mississippi, and it's
it's
affecting your
crazy.
drinking water right now. So, like, indefinitely, like, there's so many things that are happening because instead of people, working on our behalf, people have been working to maintain power. They're
And this
not
is the
working
end
for
result.
us, right? They're
Yeah.
power, absolutely. And they're beyond frightened because the minority in this
Yeah,
country is
for
about to
sure.
become the majority. And Chris Rock made a really funny joke. He said, when kids they act really, really crazy when it's nap
Yeah.
time or time to go to sleep. Like they're
They're
running around, they're doing stupid stuff. They're like out of control, and it's like, well, it's time you go to bed. So like that is
It's
what
nap
we're
time.
experiencing right now. Like people are having a temper tantrum because they
Yeah.
know it's time to go to sleep.
Yeah.
It's about to be over for them.
Yeah.
Um, so I just don't want people to get discouraged by everything they're saying. I want
Yeah.
people to know that folks
Yeah.
are working
Oh,
behind the
yeah.
scenes as much as possible, or
Yeah.
front of the scenes. But we all have to do our individual part,
Yeah,
and that
and we
is the
don't want
voting.
you to be discouraged. We want you to go out and vote. We want you to be activated. We want you to care about something because to me, that's a large part of what's going on with voter apathy and people not caring is because they don't have anything that has ignited them. It doesn't affect in their minds. They can't see how
It
it
doesn't
affects
affect.
them as an individual. If you're talking to someone about voting, they're like, "What does that have to do with me? That what does that have to do with my me working day to day, paycheck to paycheck? What does it have to do with?"
It
but
literally
they
has
can't
everything to do from the
see it.
healthcare you receive. Yeah, yeah. Well, look, so in 2020, I'll say this, like we had the highest voter turnout
Mhm,
in modern history, where over 60% of Americans voted. And they voted because obviously we're all sitting down, it was COVID, but you could see how government impacts your lives. If your president does not believe in a global pandemic, if your governor does not believe in a global pandemic, all of these things impact the way in which you are making money.
make it
Can you
plain,
actually go to work? Can we
Stephanie.
walk outside? So, like, we saw firsthand how government impacts our lives every single day. And now they're trying to take control of our uterus. So, like, now that to me, there's absolutely no excuse. And I know that through research, unfortunately, like messaging around, especially for young Black people, it doesn't resonate that, oh, your grandparents fought for this right or they died for this. They're like, psh, whatever, which is really sad. And they don't view voting as a responsibility, but more as like a choice that they
Mhm,
maybe should make. But I would encourage people, if you're interested, if you like history, if you value it, Brian Stevenson, who is an amazing lawyer who works consistently 24 hours to help get people off of death row. He has a lynching memorial down in Montgomery, Alabama. And I went there recently, and literally, I mean, you can see these pillars, like you have to look up, like you are looking at a body, and it is jarring. And you see the county and the name, and you see people with your last name, and you can't help but to think, is this a
mhm,
family member of mine? But he has this whole wall, looks like the Vietnam Memorial Wall, where there are reasons why these men or these women were lynched. And I kid you not, is either looking at a white woman. Okay, that was one of the reasons why folks were lynched at a high level. But the other one was voting.
mm.
They voted, they tried to vote. It's like, oh my God. Like there were
Wow.
countless of African Americans killed, countless just for trying to vote. So, I think us not understanding that history, it's beyond like for me disappointing because it
Mhm,
wasn't that long ago, and we
mhm,
take it for granted and shrug it off. And look, I get it. That's a part of voter suppression because voter suppression manifests in the physical through the
mhm.
laws and the barriers, but it manifests in the mental through the thought
I
that
love
my vote
listening to
doesn't count.
stories when people tell
Um,
me, like my grandmother would talk about when she finally got to vote, or they would dress up
yeah,
because voting was a privilege. They
yeah,
understood how it was like
yeah.
putting your Sunday's best to go and vote because it is a privilege. And now it's like, oh, is everyone near me? Do I have time? Can I park here? I don't
I
know
100
how, and I think we're trying our best to do that. But voting is still very much a privilege for the marginalized.
It is. I mean, where do you wanna live in a democracy? Like, democracy is where the people
Yeah.
are supposed to have the power, right? So, you can only have the power if you participate. And I think that we've been spoiled because we haven't had to think in this country, "Well, where is my water coming from? Do I have to walk, miles to a well to get water? Or do I have electricity? Or do I have access to this?" We have access to so much, and we've just sat down and gotten comfortable. And I think too, like after President Obama was elected, it was like, all right, well, he's going to fix everything, and and I'm not going to do anything else. I mean, literally, that's what happened. People sat down, and
Mhm.
that's why in 2010, he lost the House of Representatives, and he was so limited in what he actually could do. But you had people like Mitch McConnell back in the day stand up and say, "We're going to make him a one-term president." You had people stand up in on the floor in the House of Representatives and call him a liar in a tone where that it wasn't
They wanna just
liar was
say
not the word they wanted to
exactly.
say.
The other ER, not the it may
So come on, like so at the end of the day, like, I think President Obama doesn't get all the credit that
Mhm.
actually he deserves, in trying his best to work in a system that
I agree,
was
I
racist and
agree,
that
I agree,
no had no interest in working with him and showing him the respect as a man, and then turning around and being mad and being like, "Well,
I
he didn't fix
agree,
this or
I
he wasn't
agree.
able to do this," and then sitting back. And then listening to all that disinformation,
Mhm.
which is heartbreaking, in 2016, and allowing like all that chatter to deter you from voting. And now we have a Supreme Court that looks the way it does. So I there's so many examples to point to. I think the thing that we have to remember is this. For those of us who do participate, it can be frustrating when we talk to our family
Sure.
members or the people in our lives that don't, right? We have to remember this. It takes 7 touches to
Hmm.
get someone registered to vote. 7. So you can't just go, "Hey, register," and they're like, "Okay."
Oh, you gotta go
That's like
back.
an
You gotta
anomaly,
go
like that.
back to 'em.
You gotta go back. "Hey, did you finish?
Yeah.
Did you complete it?
Okay.
Make sure you do
7
this.
touches.
Did you do that?" Like, 7. So, it's not gonna be a
Okay.
one and done. These conversations aren't a one and
We'll
done.
keep
You
doing
have
it.
to consistently people. Yeah. And then also for the people in your life, you have to say, look, I will do this with you. I'll help you get registered. I will
Yeah.
go vote with you. And what we do when we vote, we have parties at the polls. So we'll be having parties at the polls this October for early voting and going into obviously election day, November 8th. National voter registration day is coming up. I know nobody knows about that day. Only people who work in this space do.
Like, what?
Regardless, the September 18th
Yeah.
is going to be a really big week of action where we'll be out there registering voters, and we would love people to join us in doing that. We're going to have a big training call on the 13th. We're going to have another call on the 19th with someone special. Wink, wink. So
Yeah.
sure
Yeah.
that people are, if you want to do your part and you feel like you want to do more, we are that space for you to come to, and we make it easy. We try to make it fun and celebratory. But like, this is a continual conversation, and I hate when people say we don't want to talk about politics at the dinner table. Well,
Absolutely.
you should, because if you don't do politics, politics will do you, and it's doing us.